Our Bible begins with these words. In the beginning, God. In the beginning, God. God is the fourth word in the Bible, and that word, that little bitty three-letter word, God, that word is the most important word in the Bible. If you want to circle one word and that's what the thing is about, it is that word. It is about God. It's the most important word in the Bible, and that word God is the most important word in your life. We say this all the time around here, but it's from A.W. Tozer. He said the most important thought a person will ever think is the one immediately following that little three-letter word, the fourth word in the Bible, God. That is the most important thought you will ever think. It determines everything about your life, where your life is headed, the direction of your life, the aim and purpose and hope of your life, what you're going to live for, what you're going to die for. It's all determined by that one thought that immediately follows that word, God. And our main problem is not that we think too big of thoughts of God, that we have too bright of thoughts, too weighty of thoughts of God. That is not our problem. Our problem is that we have small, insignificant, dull thoughts of God. That's the problem of our life, that we don't see God as big and as bright as He actually is. But if we want to see God as big and beautiful and bright, if we want to have bright thoughts of God, we have to go to the place where God has revealed Himself to us, where He has opened up His heart and He shows us Him, and that's the Bible. This is why we read the Bible. This is why we delight daily in the Scriptures, because in the Scriptures, God is opening up His heart. He's revealing Himself to us. And I want to take this passage that we're in today, Genesis chapter 28, and I want to show you three things about God that we learn in this passage. Three things, just to give us a brighter, bigger, more significant view of God. Three things we learn about God. Here is the first thing we learn in Genesis 28. We learn that God, this is the type of God we have. It's an amazing attribute of God. It's an amazing thing that we see in the heart of God. God goes after bad guys. Aren't we grateful for that? We have a God like that. He goes after bad guys. Now, let me just give you some context here. At this point in the story, when you get to Genesis chapter 28, God's chosen family, right? So Abraham, then Isaac, and now Jacob. God's chosen family, it looks like a really bad choice at about this time. It is not going well in the story. So just let's think about the story and where we are in it. Isaac marries Rebekah. They have two sons, if you remember this. It's Esau, right? He is loved by his father, and then they had Jacob. He is loved by his mom. He's a mama's boy. And last week, Justin did just such a great job of covering the Jerry Springer episode, which is otherwise known as Genesis 27. I mean, it is bizarre, it is crazy, it is everything you would want in a 60 Minutes episode right here. I mean, it is got it all. So Isaac is about to bless Esau, right? This is what's happening when you get to Genesis 27. He feels like he's about to die, and before he dies, he wants to bless his oldest son. So he's about to bless Esau, and Rebekah, she has ears everywhere. So she hears about this, that this is about to go down, that it's about to be Esau that he blesses and not Jacob that he blesses. So Rebekah starts scheming. She does what she is really good at doing. She's going to start manipulating situations. She's going to start scheming. And here is the scheme. Jacob, you're going to pose as Esau. Now, that's going to be really hard because he is like the hairiest man that's ever been. But they're going to figure it out. They're going to start scheming, and he's going to pose as Jacob. He is going to deceive his father, and then he is going to steal Esau's blessing. And after the deed goes down, Esau starts scheming. Now it's his turn to scheme, and he's going to wait until his dad dies, but the deed has been decided. He is going to kill his brother, Jacob. And then Rebekah, who's got those ears everywhere, she hears about Esau scheming, and so she starts scheming again. You can just see how crazy this story is. So she starts scheming, and she manipulates Isaac to send Jacob to her home country to find a wife. This is going to be her way to kind of save Jacob's life, to convince Isaac to do that. So that's what happens. Isaac sends Jacob off, and this is where we pick it up in Genesis chapter 28. Jacob has started that 500-mile journey to Haran. Verse 10 of Genesis 28 starts like this. Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. He came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. Okay, now these two verses are painting a picture for us. They're wanting us to see something. And let me kind of maybe back up to describe the arc that it's sort of painting of Joseph's life. There is something in literature, it's a genre called a tragedy. And if you know what a tragedy in literature is, it's a story that starts with a hero. So here's a guy who's got all sorts of potential, all sorts of promise. He is just that guy. He is the hero. But the hero has some sort of a fatal flaw. He's got some sort of bad character defect that leads to his demise and just wrecks everything. That is a tragedy in classic literature. And if you want a way to describe Jacob's life, there it is. It is a tragedy. Jacob is full of fatal flaws. His name says it all. His name is Jacob, and that means deceiver. And his name is describing him really well. This is kind of what he does. It's who he is. He takes advantage of the impulses of his brother. He deceives his dad. He steals the blessing from Esau. Jacob is just living by manipulation. Just twisting people to his end, just making sure that this person actually is going to do the very thing he wants done. This is Jacob. Jacob is what we would just call a bad guy. That's Jacob. He's a bad guy. Think of the babysitter test. The babysitter test is just it's an easy way just to sort of test the decency of a person. Is this guy like kind of good or kind of bad? It's an easy way. You just have to ask that question. Would I let this guy come over into my home and watch my kids? When you get to Jacob and he's on your list of babysitters, you get to his name, you're like, no, we're going to go to the next one. Who's next on that list? He doesn't pass the test, right? You're not going to let this guy come over and watch your kids. He is a bad guy. His spiritual life is a wasteland at this point in his life. Jacob knows about God. I mean, this is the guy, like Abraham is his grandpa, right? So he knows about God. He is in the right family to teach him some things about God, but he is not in the faith. In the family? Yes, but not in the faith. He knows about God, but our man here, he does not know God. God is a distant thought, a very abstract thought in his life, a very out there sort of being in his life. In the text, Jacob is not praying to God. He is not talking to God. God is just an insignificant afterthought in Jacob's life. And Jacob's fatal flaws, they are starting to sink his life. His circumstances are now sort of being reflected, or his character is now kind of being reflected in his circumstances. His circumstances, his life is now bad. And so in 10 and 11 are painting the picture of the badness of his life, the descent of his life, the demise of his life. Verse 10, Jacob is running from his brother who wants him dead. That's a rough life, right? So he's got fear just chasing him. That's verse 10. In verse 11, he came to a certain place and stayed there because the sun had set. Now, that's a good description of Jacob's life. The sun has set. Jacob's life has descended into darkness. This is Jacob's life. It is so bad that in verse 11, the text says that he is using a rock for a pillow. It's got to be bad when that's your life. You don't have a blanket. You don't have a thing in your life to sleep on. So your choice is, give me a rock to lay my head down upon. Right? It's just painting a picture for you. It's trying to show you something about his life. It's so bad that a stone is his pillow. He has gone from great wealth. I mean, his life is so great. He would be like a king in his land. He has gone from that to a rock pillow. The narrative is painting this picture of a desolate man in a desolate place in utter darkness. That's the picture we're seeing of Jacob's life. He's in the middle of nowhere. He has nothing and he has no one. Our man has fallen a long way from the promise Rebekah received back in Genesis chapter 25 when God comes to her right before she's going to have these two kids, Esau and Jacob. And God says to her, 2 nations are in your womb. He's a long way from a nation right now. right? Two peoples from within you shall be divided. He's a long way from a peoples. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. He's a long way from that being true. Our man has fallen hard. Jacob is a bad guy, but he is God's bad guy. That's what this text is showing us. He is God's bad guy. Jacob has made a mess of everything in his life. I mean, his life is not good. He has wrecked it all, and God didn't move on. God didn't look at him and say, oh, you're going to do that? Well, you had your chance, now we're finished. God doesn't do that. He doesn't move on. God comes after Jacob. He moves toward Jacob. He doesn't give up on Jacob. Jacob's done bad things, right? He's manipulated. He's deceived. He's had no interest in God, but God goes after the bad guy. This is the heart of God that we're seeing in this text. Last night, I was just thinking about this moment, knowing that there would be some in here who feel very much like Jacob. You're looking at your life and you're just sitting in the ruins of it, the wreckage of it. That you're even shocked at the sort of sin that's come into your life. I knew that there would be some here this morning, maybe that was last night, maybe it was last week, and you feel so condemned, you feel so hopeless, you feel this deep sense of like, there's just no way God would not move on from me. That there is no way God would keep coming after me. There's no way God would open up new life for me. Everything is hopeless. And maybe, just maybe, God has brought you here today to be reminded that God goes after bad guys. This is the sort of God we have. His grace is bigger than your sin. I mean, this is kind of the message of the Bible, isn't it? That we're all really bad guys and that God goes after bad guys. He doesn't move on from us in our mess, but he moves toward us in our mess, giving new life and new hope to us. This is who our God is. And man, if that's you who need to be reminded of that today, I'm praying that you would just hear that from God. I love bad guys. You may be a bad guy, but you're my bad guy. You may be in a mess, but it's my mess. This is the first thing we see about God, is God loves, he goes after bad guys. Here's the second thing we see about God, is that God is always at work. So God goes after bad guys. It's an amazing thing. Where would any of us be if that weren't true about God? And God is always at work. When Jacob is in the dark, right, he's a bad guy. God comes to him, and God comes to him in a dream. And the dream comes in two parts. And if you want to think about the two parts of the dream, there is a picture that God gives him, and then there is a set of promises that God makes to him. So a picture and a promise. Let's just look at the promise first. This starts in verse 13. God comes to Jacob in the dream and says to Jacob, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. So God is just establishing himself as the same God who talked to your grandpa Abraham and your dad Isaac. Now I'm talking to you, Jacob. Now it's your turn. Now it's me and you, Jacob. And then God says to him in verse 13, the land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. Now that is the very same promise that he gave Abraham back in Genesis chapter 12. It's the same promise. It's the promise of a place. God is looking now at Jacob and he's just reaffirming that promise. Jacob, I'm going to give you this land that I promised to your granddad, to your dad, and now it's going to be yours, Jacob. It's the promise of a place. And then verse 14, your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth. Remember, Jacob's not married. He doesn't have any kids yet. And Jacob, your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Again, it's just the same promise that he made to his granddad and his dad. It's the promise of a people. And God is just giving him the sort of foretaste of, yes, you're going to be a people, and from you, this people, Jacob, is going to be a person, and that person, his name is Jesus, right? That person is going to bless everyone, all mankind, all human beings. He's going to bless all the nations, Jacob. So he gives him that promise of a people. And then you get to verse 15. Behold, Jacob, behold, I want you to see this, so just stop and notice, Jacob. Behold, I am with you, and Jacob, I will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Again, it's that same promise he's given Abraham, same promise that he's given Isaac. It's the promise of presence, the promise of his presence. Now just think about what we're seeing here. God goes after a bad guy. And when he goes after the bad guy, it's not to punish him, but to make promises to him. This is the sort of God we have. He goes after Jacob and he doesn't correct him. He doesn't straighten out all the bad things he's done. He comes after him and makes promises to him. I'm going to be with you, Jacob. I'll always be with you. Even though you've made a mess of everything, you are my mess. I am going to be with you, always with you. It doesn't matter where you go. It doesn't matter what you do, Jacob. I am going to be with you. I am going to keep you, Jacob. Now, when God says, I'm going to give you my presence, I'm going to be with you, here is what he means by that. He means, I will always be at work for you. That's what his presence means. It's God looking at you and saying, I'm not just going to be with you in a I'm everywhere sort of sense. No, it's this covenantal witness. I'm going to be with you in a way where I promise to work for you on your behalf for your good. I will always be at work for you. Jacob, he is saying, I've made promises to you. I'll be present with you to complete all those promises that I've made. Jacob, I'm with you. I'll always be at work for you. That's the promise. And now we get the picture. In verse 12, Jacob sees a ladder. So here's the picture of the dream. Jacob sees a ladder. Or you could think of it as a stairway, right? It's stretching from heaven to earth. Led Zeppelin taught us all about it, right? Okay. So that's the picture here, right? It's this place where heaven and earth are connecting. You could maybe think of it as a portal. This is heaven down here, this is earth up here, and it's connecting. It's the portal connecting these two places together. It's an amazing dream. Jacob is watching heaven and earth come together. This is the place where all of that sacred thing is happening right there. Okay, it's the ladder. Then he sees angels ascending and descending on the ladder. Now, let's think about angels for a minute. Angels are messengers, right? They are bringing God's news to the world, and they are doing God's work in the world. This is what angels are doing. Messengers. God's news, God's work. So in Psalm chapter 91, in verses 11 and 12, we learn this about angels. It says, "For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all of your ways. On their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone." That's what God is using angels to do. They're there to serve you, to guard you. Or we can say it this way, they're there to do God's work in your life. Or we could go with the author of Hebrews in Hebrews 1:14. He says it this way, "Are they not all," talking about angels, "are they not all ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation?" So these are God's messengers. They're there to announce God's good news and to do God's good work in this world. So he sees a ladder, and on this ladder there are angels ascending and descending. And then you see God. He sees God. In verse 13 it says, "And behold, the Lord stood above it." Okay, now just see the picture that he's seeing here. See what he's seeing. It's God in heaven, and maybe you could picture it this way. He is in his castle, this palatial, amazing castle. He's there on his throne in the castle at the top of the stairway. They are in heaven. So you've got that, and then there's this stairway that stretches from earth all the way up to his castle, all the way up to his throne. And God, the great king, is there on his throne in his castle running the universe. Right? This is what he's doing. He is getting his work done in every spot of the universe, all across the universe. And he's giving, maybe you could see it this way, he's giving this army of angels, he's giving them tasks to do, jobs to do, work to do, missions to accomplish. He's giving them these tasks to do. They come down the ladder, they do their task in this world, they come back up, they get another one, they come back down, they do the work, they come back up. This is the picture. It is God running the universe. It is God doing his work. It's a picture of our always present God, always at work for his people. That's the picture you're seeing here in this dream. Now, what is the point? God is coming to Jacob's life, and he is looking at Jacob, and he is saying, Jacob, here's the point. Here's what I want you to see in this dream. Jacob, I am present. I am always at work in your life. I am present, Jacob, so you can trust my promises. You can trust me. Jacob, I'm present so you can trust me. Jacob, you don't have to manipulate to get your way. You don't have to cheat to get your way. You don't have to do this stuff on your own, Jacob. No, I am present. I am your God. I am always at work for you. I am present. So Jacob, you can trust my promises. Then in verse 16, Jacob wakes up. And look what he says in verse 16. Then Jacob woke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't know it. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't know it. Now, Jacob is a picture of what we might call like 21st century Bible Belt, been around religious stuff, man. This is what he's a picture of. He knows about God, but he doesn't know God. He knows about God, but God never makes it into his Monday. Right? He is not talking to God, praying to God, abiding in God. He is not doing any of that stuff. That is not what Jacob is up to. That is not what he is doing. God is a distant memory in his mind when Monday morning comes up. Okay, this is Jacob. Or you could maybe think of it this way. Jacob is a picture of us. He's not just a picture of just kind of the religious, Bible Belt-ish 21st century man. He's a picture of you and I. Now, I don't know about you, but it is so easy for me to live as a functional atheist. I believe in God, I love Jesus, but Jesus is just not factoring into my Monday. I'm living my Monday as if there is no God, as if it's all up to me. I just slip into that way of seeing and living so quickly, and that is Jacob. See, verse 16 is in the Bible to help us see that God can be here and at work, and us have no idea. God can be there and at work in your life, and you have no idea. God can be there and at work in my life, and me just be completely unaware of his work. And this text is in the Bible so that you can ask, is that me? Am I living in a way where I am just unaware of God and his work in my life? God is just not factoring into a Monday. He just doesn't make it into that Monday routine of mine. On Monday, it's all up to me. Is that you? And think about what happens when we live unaware of our always working God. When we do that, we just get to work. Right? When we live unaware of God who is always at work, our life shrinks to the size of human possibilities. It shrinks to the size of what you can do in your life and what I can do in my life. That's what happens when we live unaware of God and his work in our life. But when we live aware of God, that God is always at work, here's what happens to our life. Our life expands to human impossibility. Our life expands to what only God can do in our life. Now, which of those two lives do you want? These are the only two options that we have. Either you're going to get what you can do in your life by living unaware of the work of God, or you're going to get what God can do in your life as you live aware of the presence and the work of God in your life. Those are the only two options. And in this moment, God is opening Jacob's eyes to see what he can do. That's what's happening here. Jacob's in school, and here is the lesson that God is teaching him. Jacob, I am present. I am always at work, so you can trust my promises, Jacob. I'm here, I'm present, trust my promises. You know, it's interesting in the Bible that fear not is the most prevalent command. So if you want to look at the command most quoted in the scriptures, there it is. It's the command, fear not. And it's interesting that that command normally has a companion. And the companion to that command is this little promise, because I am with you. Why do we not fear? Because I am with you, God says. That's the companion that most often attaches itself to that command. Now, why is that? Why does that promise follow that command? Well, in a lot of ways, it's because God is addressing the fear behind the fear in that promise. The fear behind the fear. So think about the fear of death. That's a common fear that we have. It's a surface level fear. But think about the fear beyond that fear, deeper than that fear. Here's the reason that we fear death. We are just not sure if God is going to be there when we take our last breath. That's what makes death really scary, doesn't it? Just not sure. Think about the fear that's so often attached to money in our life. Like the reason that we love to hoard money is because we think it's going to give us some safety and security, right? Think about that fear of money, that tendency to hoard. Why is that there? Well, it's because we want a backup plan. Just in case God doesn't show up in a year from now, we just want enough of a backup plan that we can kind of eke it out. See, the fear behind the fear is, will God be there? I agree with Jackie Hill Perry when she says, perhaps we need to be reminded of the fear behind our fears, which is that most of us don't believe God is really with us. Most of us don't believe that. We don't live that way. We don't live Monday like that. We don't live Wednesday like that, Friday like that. We just don't believe that God is with us, that God is always at work in our life. But this text is here to remind us that God is present. Our God is always at work in this world and in your life. God is always at work. That's what this text is trying to convince you of. This text has given me a new goal in my life. Here's the goal. I want to live believing that God is always at work, and I want to live seeing as much of that work as I can. Wouldn't that be, I think that's a good goal for us to have. I want to live believing that God is present, He's always at work, and I want to see God's work in my life. I want to see it in my life. I want to see it in my kids' life, and Laura's life, and my friends' lives, and our church's life, and the world. I want to see as much as I can of what God is doing around me. If you can just imagine that you can travel in time, and imagine that you could go back and relive the last 7 days of your life. You get to go back to last Sunday and you get to do last week again. But this time, you don't have to live it with all the fear that you had last week, all the worries about how's it going to turn out. You already know how it turned out, right? You already know all that stuff. So now you just get to go and be present in it. And imagine if you went back and you relived the last week, and this was your one goal from the last week. Your one goal this time is to see God in your life, and just to spot everywhere that you can of His work in the world. If you were to go back and relive the last 7 days, how many times do you think you would say with Jacob, surely the Lord is in this place and I just didn't know it? Surely He's in this conversation, this providential little run-in with this person. Surely He is in that moment where I put my kid to bed. Surely He's in this moment. Surely He's in that conversation with that friend. Surely the Lord is in this place and I didn't know it. Friend, I just want to live in a way where I'm seeing it, where I know it. I want to be able to say, surely the Lord is in this place and I see it. There He is, right there. I want to live that way, seeing as much as the Lord's work as I can. Here's the second thing we learn, that God is always at work. And then here's the third thing that we learn about God. That God awes us into response. That God awes us into response. After God went after the bad guy saw the work of God, and then the bad guy said this in verse 17. The bad guy was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven." Now think about what's happening in Jacob's life here. God went from being a distant afterthought to His only thought. Okay, that's the scene right here. He has had an encounter with God. He has met God. And he has gone from this distant thought in his life to like the consuming thing that he's seeing in this moment. Jacob looks around and he says, this place is great. It's amazing. This is heaven and earth touching. God is here. This is the house of God. He's seeing the top of that ladder where God, his castle is, his throne is. And then he says, this is the gate of heaven. That's the bottom of the ladder. This is us moving up to God. He's seeing this wonderful moment. Right, and in seeing this, he is seeing God always at work, that God is promising to be present in his life, working in his life. This is a man who has been awed by God. His heart has come alive to God in this moment. His heart is seeing God in this moment. Now, let me just take a step back, and I want you to think about your life for a moment. One of the great dangers of our lives is for the great thing to become just a thing. This is what happened to Jacob. This is what God is sort of exposing and correcting and bringing some newness in his life with. But this is the great danger of your life, is for the great thing to become just a thing. For our hearts to be bored with God. For other things just to become bigger and brighter in our life. And again, this was Jacob. When God showed up, the great thing was just a thing. But here's what God did. God made the great thing everything. God became everything in Jacob's vision in this moment. Listen to David Wells in his book, God of the Wasteland, describe this danger in our life of the great thing becoming just a thing. He says it this way: the fundamental problem in the church. Okay, now when anybody that has been walking with the Lord for a long time starts a statement out like that, I want to listen to it. The fundamental problem in the church today is not inadequate technique. It's not insufficient organization. It's not antiquated music. And those who want to squander the church's resources, bandaging these scratches will do nothing to staunch the flow of blood that is spilling from its wounds. He's saying, if you think that's the problem, you're not going to be helping the church very much, okay? And then he goes on. The fundamental problem in the church today is that God rests too inconsequentially upon the church. The fundamental problem. God is insignificant and light in the church. His truth is too distant. His grace is too ordinary. His judgment too benign. His gospel too easy. And his Christ is too common. Friend, here is what our church and every church needs continually: to be re-awed by God. To be re-awed by him. For God to stay significant and weighty and heavy, not just a thing in our life, but everything in our life. And friend, if it can happen for Jacob, God can do it for you. He can do it for you. And look at where his awe took him. God awes his heart, and it leads him to respond. Awe brought devotion. You see this in verses 18 and 19. So early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at first. So that little stone that he was sleeping on, that stone pillow became a pillar, this place of worship for Jacob. And that all brought dedication. Look at verses 20 and beyond there. Then Jacob made a vow to God. He made a vow saying, if God will be with me and keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone which I've set up for a pillar shall be God's house. Now, some take this vow in a negative way, as if Jacob is kind of bargaining with God here. You give me something, I'll give you something back, God. But I don't think that's the best reading of it. I think you get the gist of sort of Jacob's heart if you change the if to a since. God, since you will be with me, God, since you're going to give me what I need in my daily life, I'm going to daily depend on you for bread and clothing and what I need to eat. Since you're going to bring me back to my Father's house in peace, since you're going to do these things, then God, you're going to be my God. It's this act of dedication. He's surrendering. He's giving his life to God. And then awe brought demonstration. Verse 22. And of all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you. The change that was happening in his heart is now working its way out to his hands. He is now ready to generously give back from what God has given to him. And friends, this is what awe does. When God is light and insignificant in our heart, we do not respond to God. But when God becomes big in our heart, when he becomes bright and significant and weighty, we respond like this with devotion, dedication, demonstration. We offer ourselves to God. This is why we need our hearts continually re-awed. Now, let me close here. We are actually meant to see through Genesis 28 all the way to Jesus. So this is not the only time Jacob's ladder comes up in the Bible. There's actually another time. It shows up in John chapter 1. So here's the setting in John 1. Jesus calls Philip to come and follow him. And then Philip went to his friend Nathanael, and he's like, Nathanael, who is, by the way, sitting under a tree. Commentators they suspect that he is likely reading this text, Genesis 28, Jacob's ladder. He's under a tree, Nathanael, reading this text. And Philip comes to Nathanael, and he's like, Nathanael, we found the guy, we found the one, we've got the Messiah, the one we have been waiting for. He has arrived. His name is Jesus. And Nathanael looks back at Philip and he's like, well, where's he from? And Philip says, well, he's from Nazareth. And Nathanael's like, no, it ain't Jesus then. That'd be like saying Jesus is from Arkansas. That just is not going to happen, right? That is beyond the pale. So Nathan walks up to Jesus, and Jesus looks at him and says, behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit. And Nathanael's like, Jesus, you don't know me. How can you say I have no deceit? How can you say that about me? And then we read this. Jesus answered him, before Philip called you and you were under the fig tree, I saw you. Nathanael answered him, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. Jesus answered him, because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? Oh, Nathanael, you will see greater things than these. And Jesus said to him, truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. Jesus looks at Nathanael and says, you know that ladder you've been reading about? That's me, Nathanael. I am the ladder. I am the person. I am the portal that connects heaven and earth, Nathanael. I am the ladder. I am how a person goes from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven. I am how a person goes from without God to with God. I am how a sinner is saved, Nathanael. Nathanael, you don't have to climb up the stairway to God through your good deeds. You can't do that, Nathanael. But Nathanael, I have come down the ladder to you through my life, death, and resurrection. I am the ladder. Nathanael, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And Nathanael, no one can come to the Father. No one can experience rescue. No one can be saved from God's wrath, from hell. No one comes to the Father except through me. So, church, if we want our hearts re-awed by God today, here's where we have to look at God's work for us in Jesus. We have to look at the ladder, the one who bled so that we could become family, the one who was broken so that we could be brought to God. Let's look at Jesus. Would you bow with me? I want to give you a moment to ask the Spirit of God, God, what would you have for me today? What do you want me to hear from you today? What's one way I can take Genesis 28 and respond to you today? And maybe you need to ask the Lord to re-awe your heart. Maybe the great thing has become just a thing. And friends, some of us in the room, we have not met the latter. We have not met Jesus, and Jesus is standing here before you today saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. If you want God, if you want rescue, I am that way. So friend, if that's you, throw your life upon him. God loves bad guys. He loves to rescue them. His heart leaps toward them. So friend, if that's you, throw your life upon him today. So God, would you meet with us now? God, would you do that work of awing our heart and then re-awing it again, making the great thing of the universe everything to us? Oh God, would you do it? It's in the great name of Jesus we ask it.